Hi everybody, Stephen here. In this video, we're going to talk about VMware Cloud Foundation version 9 VPCs, but this is a two-part series, so we're going to focus on what a transit gateway is. So if you're not sure what a transit gateway is, or even better, on how to set one up, stick around. That's what we're going to cover. See you in a bit. Thanks for sticking around. So as I mentioned before, this is a two-part video. So this first part will be on VMware Cloud Foundation, the transit gateway. So we need to know that before we get into VPCs. That'll be the second part. I also like to throw out there at this point, thank you very much for those of you that subscribe to the channel and support the channel. Really appreciate it. We're almost at 10,000 subscribers. That'd be really good. We hit that mark, and I got nothing but to do with thank you folks for doing that. For those of you that haven't subscribed to the channel and watch us, please consider supporting the channel. It's totally free. Hit that subscribe button. It's so simple. And I also like to throw this out there as well. This is my first video since Explore, VMware Explore 2025 or Explore 2025. I want to throw out a thank you for those of you that came up to me at Explore, shook my hand, said thank you very much for the channel. It meant a lot to me. I really appreciate it. There was a bunch of you that I met there, and hey, you know what? Maybe we'll see you again next year at Explore or maybe at a VMUG event. Who knows? Also, I do have super thanks enabled, but we'll leave that there. Why don't we get started? There is a small lecture component, and then we're going to do the demo. Okay? So why don't we get going here? So before we jump into transit gateways and VPCs, one of the things you need to understand is what an NSX project is. Okay. Now I've done a video on version 4 on projects and VPCs. Those videos are still valid. You may want to take a look at those, but there's been some pretty big changes in VMware Cloud Foundation version 9. Okay. So there are some differences, but if you want to go back and look at those videos, it's also a good foundation to build on. So first of all, since NSX uses a hierarchy of projects and VPC spaces to isolate infrastructure resources among tenants. Now, projects, you can relate it to a tenant. I'm going to create a project for each tenant, let's say, or department. You know, those are my customers, right? I might make you the administrator of project A. I might make somebody else the administrator of project B. So now when you sign into NSX, you'll be able to administer your project. Whatever you do in your project does not impact other projects or my other environment. So it's a way of providing isolation, which is great. And I actually demoed that in the version 4. So none of that stuff really kind of changed. The big thing is with projects is that you kind of have to know how to work with NSX. So great, I make you administrator of your project and you sign into NSX and you go, well, what do I do? Right? Well, you got to know what a tier 1 gateway is. You got to know what segments are and how to connect them all up. You know, all that kind of NSX stuff you have to know, right? So, okay, great, provides with isolation, but it doesn't address the self-service type capabilities Broadcom wants. And that's where VPCs come in. It says each project contains one or more VPCs. There's a default space that's created by default, figures, by NSX. So we'll see that. And again, this can provide for isolation. Now, you'll see over here, we've got some VPCs. And we'll talk more in depth on VPCs in the second one. But with VPCs, again, it allows me to do that self-provisioning. So great, I'm the administrator of my project. I could create VPCs or a single VPC if I want to in my project and give that to you, let's say. And then you could sign into NSX and you'll have a very simplified view like, oh, I want to create a subnet. Well, what kind of subnet do I want? And then you would connect your VMs to it. Very simplified. You don't have to know what a tier 1 gateway is, tier 0 gateway. You don't have to know any of that stuff, right? So the VPC does bring that self-service capabilities to us. Now, in VMware Cloud Foundation version 9, they up the ante. So now your vSphere administrators can do a lot of this stuff, right? And they don't have to know anything about NSX. And that's what we're going to show you, okay? So anyways, but before we get going on VPCs, we need to understand what a transit gateway is. So a transit gateway, let's go forward. This is new in version 9, VCF 9. it enables project connectivity to the external networks. So their VPCs talk to each other through these transit gateways and can talk to the outside world through these transit gateways. This is why I'm doing this video first. And you can see, kind of see a picture right there. I have, a VPC 1 right here. I have another VPC, let's say VPC 2 here. They could talk to each other through the transit gateway, or they could talk to the outside world, or the outside world could talk to them if I get things set up properly. So the VPC, the transit gateway is very important, okay? So it provides all communication between our VPCs, provides external connectivities for the VPCs and projects, and I just mentioned that. Now there's two ways we can spin up a transit gateway. Two ways we could do this. We could do a centralized transit gateway or a distributed transit gateway, all right? So here are the two different connectivity types. The first one here, we'll just draw a little line down the center. First one on the left is what we call the centralized transit gateway, right? You'll see right off the bat, we have some VPCs here. And here's my transit gateway. But you'll see right off the bat here, I have an edge cluster in a tier 0 gateway. So this one here, the centralized, requires that you have an edge cluster to provide us with our connectivity to the outside world, but also provide us with various services like network address translation and stuff like that, okay? So we have that option there. So great. And if you're not familiar with gateways inside NSX, I would suggest that you probably look that up. I got videos on all that, all my NSX stuff. So if you know what a tier 1 gateway is, tier 0 gateways, subnets are, logical switches, this will be easier to digest as well. The one on the right now is what we call the distributed transit gateway. Distributed transit gateway, okay? You'll notice here's your transit gateway. Hey, there's no edge. So this one on the right is edgeless, okay? Less resources. This, you'll see your transit gateway is connected right to the physical network. So there's a VLAN right there. Whereas if you're familiar with NSX, the edge is kind of our boundary between our VLAN type environment, our real world, and our NSX virtual environment, the overlay network, right? So over here on the right, this is totally different. So the one on the right sounds really cool. A couple things about it. It's really simple to set up, okay? And it doesn't have any edges here, so I don't need to consume those resources for my edge. Sounds wonderful. So which one should you use? VPCs will work with either one of them. Which one are you going to use? And that's where this table comes into play, all right? When we talk about the distributed, let's look at the far right. When we talk about the distributed, you see there's various services or features that are not available. Down to the last two on the bottom, there is VCF automation and the supervisor cluster, right? So if you're going to be playing with VCF automation more from a supervisor cluster perspective, in other words, I'm not a Kubernetes guy, but this is like Kubernetes, Tanzu, that type of stuff. Again, don't crucify me too much on that. I'm not a Kubernetes or Tanzu guy, right? If you want to play with that, then you can't use this. North-south firewall, that's not going to work either. Remember, we now have security has been kind of spun out on its own, so it's all under the vDefend. So if you decide, I'm going to get licenses for VMware Cloud Foundation for security, for vDefend, one of those licenses you're going to probably get is the gateway firewall, which provides you firewall north-south. Well, that won't work here because you need an edge cluster for that. Remember, this is edgeless. So much for that. These other two here might sound a little bit bizarre. Here they talk about source and destination NATing and VPC default NAT. It's not available. These two, what they're saying here is if I want to do network address translation, and I'll kind of give you a demo on this when we get into the VPC part, right? Show you the difference of what's not going to happen. Since we don't have an edge cluster there, the edge generally provides us with our north and south network address translation, okay? Because it's a service, centralized service. So since we don't have an edge, we can't do that. However, I can do what they refer to here as external IP, a one-to-one NATing. So there's a concept called the public IP, and your VMs, I can actually say, okay, this public IP is going to map to this VM. So one-to-one mapping NAT. You burn through a lot more addresses but it can be done, okay? So you can do this one-to-one or external IP being mapped to a VM if you like. So we see there's a limitation there on the distributed. But if you don't care about any of those, hey, it's really simple to set up. Now, when we talk about centralized, remember it's an edge cluster. If you're familiar with that, if you're not, you want to watch my videos. The edge cluster, when we set up gateways, we can say I want it to be in active mode or active standby. Active means I have multiple edge nodes, traffic's flowing in and out of those. Connectivity to your physical environment would need to be support equal cost multipathing. I talk about all that in my routing videos in NSX. Now with this one, with active, very similar to the distributed, we can't support a lot of features. No default outbound NAT. There's no north-south firewall capabilities. And again, the cloud services, VCF automation and the supervisor cluster is not supported. I do get a default NAT, which I do not get a default NAT. Sorry about that. But I can do source and destination NAT. I found that this one here was a little weird. Because I have an edge cluster, I can actually still do source and destination NATing, okay? And I think they're referring here to reflexive NAT or stateful NAT, reflexive. I have not tried it, okay? Now, so all this other stuff is not going to work. The stateful firewall won't work. And it's probably more, again, don't quote me on this, but it's more than likely because it's a stateful firewall and it only works in active standby. But hang on a second. Some of you can say, Steve, you did a video on stateful active on NSX. And the firewall is one of those supported features, same thing with NATing. So why isn't it supported here? I would imagine it's because the reason for a big nose here is because they don't support the stateful active yet on this. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? Anyways, then the other option is to deploy your transit gateway as active standby. It means all traffic flows through one edge node, the other one's there as standby, okay? Very familiar to active standby when we talk about our routing at NSX. And you see everything is supported there, okay? So again, if you need all this other stuff, you're gonna deploy your your transit gateway centralized in active standby mode, okay? Yeah, so one thing I want to talk about, actually, you know what? Why don't we do this? We'll come back. Let's set up the centralized one. That's the most complicated one, more complicated, I will say. And I'll walk you through that step by step. We'll do the centralized active standby, okay? And then we'll come back and we'll do the distributed transit gateway, okay? So, see you in a bit. Oh, by the way, hey, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel and you found this stuff useful, hit that subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. See you in a bit. Okay, so we're back. Let's jump into it. I'm actually already logged into my environment. I got VMware Cloud Foundation version 9 running here. So if I log into my VCF ops, you'll see, we'll give it a few seconds. If I go to inventory, if I go to detailed view, I can actually still look at it from a basic view. Detailed view. There's my VCF environment. I called it my VCF. There's my management domain, and I actually have a workload domain, okay? Nothing's set up. If I go into NSX, you'll see there's no segments, there's no transit gateways, there's none of this stuff, no tier zeros. If I go to system, there's no edge nodes, no edge clusters, okay? Pretty vanilla in setup, except for the hosts that are part of the management domain, okay? On my management domain, showing you this because I'm doing central. I pointed out I got a management domain and I got a workload domain. I'm going to do a centralized gateway on the management domain. I'll demo that, and then later we'll do the distributed on the workload domain, just to show you both type of thing. Anyways, let's go into vSphere. I've got my vCenter server selected. I'm going to pick my networking view. From my networking view, let me show you. I actually have two distributed switches in my management domain. First one is vSAN, vMotion management. The second one is for my NSX. Okay. So I'm gonna be putting most of the stuff on the first one. If I go to configure, if I go into what do I want? Topology here. You'll see I actually have two uplinks on this distributed switch, VMNIC 0 and VMNIC 1. Okay, I'm going to be utilizing that. So you'll see there's a port group called VM Management, another port group called ESX Management, a port group for vMotion, and then vSAN. Yeah, so there's the vMotion vSAN. Okay, great. So let me go back in here. I'm in my networking view. I'm going to click on networks, under network connectivity. Boom, you'll see this screen, configure network connectivity. Let me click on that. It's going to say, what do you want? Centralized transit gateway or distributed? We're going centralized. We'll go next. Now, again, it's got a checklist here. Plan for edge taps, plan for edge tap VLANs, same VLANs as a host can be used. I actually ran into a problem with that. I'm not going to go too far into that, but I actually ran into some issues with the edges on the same VLAN as the host on the same distributed switch. I'm not sure exactly. I should be able to do that. I'm not sure why it's happening, but anyways, whatever. Edges can be deployed in host groups. I'll talk about that. Edges, when you deploy the edge, it's going to reserve 100% of CPU shares and memory, so it's going to suck back some resources, FYI. Management networks, when you're deploying the edge, again, you must be able to reach your NSX manager. I'll show you that. I must have DNS entries. If you're using dynamic routing, you need to have two peers. You'll see that when I set up my interfaces. Reserve a local autonomous system number. This is all part of BGP. If you're going to be using static routes, in other words, your edge is going to be running in active standby mode, it's recommended to configure a virtual HA virtual IP. What that is, if you're doing static routes, one edge will be active, so that virtual IP will basically be bound to that first edge. If that active one fails, it goes over to the second edge. It makes your static routing a lot easier in your real environment. I've actually got a video on that, not for VCF, but just for network. Reserve external IP blocks for VPC connectivity. So I'll show you that as we get there. Anyways, I'll say select all. I'll go next. Now it's asking me, what's my edge cluster name? It's deploying an edge cluster. Your vSphere admin's deploying an edge cluster. I'm going to call it management-edge C cluster 01. The tunnel endpoint size, by default, you'll see 1700 here. So my taps, I'm going to be using jumbo frames, 9000. I've got my environment. By default, it'll say 17. How do you change that? Because there's no box here, right? You have to go into NSX. You got to go into system. Under fabric, you'll see settings. And then from there, tunnel endpoint, MTU. The default here is 1700. I actually had changed mine to 9000, okay? So if you see 1700 there, you got to go in NSX. My edge form factor, I can go small, medium, large, or extra large. This is going to be dependent on the amount of traffic you expect to go through it, that type of services. I'm just going to go medium. Now I'm going to add my first one. I'm going to type in the fully qualified domain name, NSX-01.vclass.edu. You must have forward and reverse lookup set up on this. What cluster is this going to run on? Again, I only got the one. I'm doing the management one here, but it doesn't really matter. You would pick a cluster if it's in your workload domain. If you got resource pools, you can put it in there. I don't. Host group affinity. Notice I got no selected. What that is if you've got host groups set up, groups of hosts. So let's say I've got rack 1 with a bunch of hosts. I got rack 2 with a bunch of hosts. I could create host group affinities and say, I want to make sure these edges run on different host groups. So one edge would run on one rack, the other edge would run on the second rack. So if the whole rack fails, I have redundancy. You can do that. I don't care in my lab. What data store am I going to put it on? I have vSAN set up. I'm just going to pick that. The management IP. This is, remember, you have 5 interfaces on your edges. The first one you set up is management, and that's what we're doing here. How are you assigning the IP? DHCP or static? I'm going to be going static. So, and then it's saying, what port group are you going to connect this to? This port group has to be able to reach your NSX manager, or it will fail during the deployment. So there's a port group called PGVM Management. That was set up by VMware Cloud Foundation. So I'm going to put it there. What's the IP address? 172.20.10.61/24. That's the IP address for this edge node. What's a gateway? 172.20.10.10. Okay, that's my lab environment. Great. Over here it says, use the host overlay network configuration from the selected vSphere host. This is supposed to make configuration easier. I've never been able to select this box. I don't know why. Now, great. So our first NIC is the management. Then you got 4 more NICs left over, virtual NICs. How this is going to set up, it's only going to set up 2. Notice it says FPETH0 here, down here. So your first NIC for data, this would be for your underlay and overlay, let's say, or potentially, is FP for FastPath, ETH0. This is ETH1, ETH2, ETH3. Now, the way they got this set up is using like validated design solutions where it's only going to use 2 NICs, okay? So this is how we're doing. We got 2 NICs that's going to be used for overlay traffic and VLAN back traffic. Do I agree with that? Whatever. That's how it's set up. So now over here, it's saying what interfaces do you want to use here? Like I said, it's actually going to use. It's actually going to use the interfaces on my second distributed switch. Notice over here, I don't see VMNIC 0. Let me scroll up. Oh, there we go. I have to kind of scroll up. I find sometimes that this is hard to find and hard to select. So what I do when I get here, I type it, VMNIC 0. I'll hit enter and boom, it does everything for me. So sometimes if you're having issues with this browser interface, just type it in. So I'm using now VMNIC 0, if I highlight that, VMNIC 0. Sorry, yeah. Wow, show me there. Come on. Yeah, VMNIC 0. There we go. See what I mean? I'm using VMNIC 0, my management domain, on my first distributed switch. My second distributed switch is being used for overlay traffic, TEPs for my host. And I find if I put it on there, I have issues. I'm not sure exactly why, right? Maybe it's a bug. I don't know. But anyways, I'm going to put it on a different distributed switch than my host TEPs are using. And that's what this is here. One's going to be active, one's going to be standby. What's the TEP VLAN my edge is going to use? In my lab, it's VLAN 11. And then how you assign any addresses to these TEPs for your edges. Remember, it's going to get 2 TEPs each. So you can DHCP, great, rock and roll. IP pool, again, you can go in here and create an IP pool. This creates an NSX IP pool. Or you can say static list. If I say static list, you type in the addresses mainly. I'm going to pick IP pool, and I could create one right here with these 3 dots. I can create a new IP pool, right? Or I can select one that's already there. I already have one for when I configured my management domain, and I'm going to use this, all right? But if I didn't, I would create a new one and say, this is my range. Great, this is how I got things set up. I'm going to say apply. There's the first edge. You got to repeat the process for the second edge. But hang on, there's an easier way to do it. Select it, go clone, and you don't have to put in all that stuff, just the fully qualified domain name. So a-NSX-Edge-02.bclass.edu. Then you got the CIDR, 172.20.10.62. It's the IP address of the management interface of that second edge, and it's gateway 172.20.10.10. I kind of wish it would default to filling out some. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. So that's cool. I'm going to go apply. There's my 2 edges. Do I want auto-generate passwords? Okay. You can control this with VCF VCF operations if you want to. I'm going to mainly type in my passwords for admin and for root. So, and you see the password requirements there. And I'm going to look at it, and I don't care if you see it because it gets blown away. And then it's my lab environment. I'm going to copy and paste that. Now, I consider this a bad thing to do, this copy and pasting, because suppose if I was off by a digit here and I didn't see that, and I copy and paste it, when I go to log in, I got problems. So I think it's kind of laziness me doing this, but hey, it's a video, right? Don't do that in production. I'm going to click next. This is the fun part. This is the part I said, configuring the centralized gateway. Remember what we're doing is creating edge nodes, creating an edge cluster, and we're setting up our peering for our routing. This might be a bit overwhelming for your vSphere person. They may not be the networking person. So if that's the case, they can say skip that, and you could do it later in NSX. Okay? I'm going to say no, I'm going to continue on. So this is the part where I'm thinking, like, you may not let your vSphere, or you may not let your vSphere administrators do this. Or you may say, here's all the information you need. Or your NSX folks may do all this inside NSX before your vSphere administrators. Anyways, let's continue on. This is all part of that self-service stuff for VCF 9. So what's the gateway name? I'm going to call this Management-Transit Gateway 01. And remember that chart we looked at, all the different features? I'm going to go active standby, so I got them all. What type of routing? Am I going to go static routes or BGP? In my lab environment, we're going to go BGP. My local autonomous routing number is 100. That's my edges here. And then now I have to start setting up interfaces. This is kind of the fun part. So each edge has two interfaces, one going to top of rack left, one going to top of rack right, two separate routers. So each of them, that's 4 interfaces I'm going to be setting up right now. Keep that in the back of your mind. So let's set up edge node 1, its first interface. Its first interface is VLAN 100. Its interface IP 192.168.100.2/24. That's my edge's first interface's IP, not the management, the data. What's the what's the IP address of the router I'm going to peer with? It's 192.168.100.1. Okay, and do I have bidirectional forward detection set up on that? In the real world, you probably would. This allows for fast error detection, up to 500 milliseconds times 3, so 1.5 seconds failure detection on links and stuff. I don't have that. I'm just going to leave it deselected. What's the MTU? I'm going to pick 1500. Now remember, this is communication between my edge and my top of rack switch. That's not part of your overlay network. Okay, that's down here. The overlay's down here with the 9000. This could be 9000 as well, but again, my lab environment is 1500. Remember, the edge is kind of the boundary or the termination point of your overlay, then going back to your regular stuff. I talk about it in our routing videos. What is the peer autonomous system? What's that edge up there? It's 200, right? 200 is it? And do I have it password protected? No, I don't. I'm going to go next. That's the first interface. This is now the second interface. So what's the second interface of this edge? It's on VLAN 110 in my lab environment. Its IP is 192.168.110.2/24. That's its IP address. And then the CIDR for its IP. Then the BGP, the router it's compared with, 192.168.110.1. And again, the M2 is 1500, and the BGP it's pairing with is 200. Looks good. 110, 110, 1. Okay, great. I go apply. There, edge node 1 is done. It's got 2 interfaces. Let's do edge node 2. Same thing. This stuff you want to write down, right? You know, let's do. Okay, so this is edge node 2. Its first interface. That's in VLAN 100 in my lab environment. Its IP of its interface is 192.168.100.3/24. There's its CIDR for its interface, and the IP it's going to pair with is 192.168.100.1, right? Everything's 100, great. The MTU is 1500, and the peer BGP or ASN is 200. And next. Now, this is the second interface. This is on VLAN 110 in this example, in my lab. And the gateway interface is 192.168.110.3/24. It's on the 110 network. And I'm peering to 192.168.110.1. And the M2 is 1500. And the ASN for that router is 200. I'm going to go apply. Great. Almost done. 2 more things here we got to fill out. VPC external IP blocks. These are routable addresses in your environment that you're going to give your VPCs. We'll talk more about that when I get into subnets on VPCs, right? Then there's also another block. There's a public block and this other one called a transit gateway block. I'm going to put that one on 192.168. No, maybe not that address. I'll do 172.16.200.0/24. Okay. I will talk about these when we get into VPCs and stuff, and especially when we get into subnets. You'll see how we get pulled. These subnets will pull addresses from these 2 pools, depending on the type of subnet. So anyways, more on that later. I'm looking good. Cross fingers. I go next. And it comes up and gives me this little pretty picture here. And I'm going to hit deploy. Watch what's going on over here on the left. You notice also a few port groups just popped up there. All right, interesting. We just wait. We wait. There we go. That's what I want to see. It's actually now installing 2 edge nodes here. If I give this thing a few seconds, we should see it's actually pushing out 2 edge VMs to my environment right now. This, again, just a couple things here. This is all owned by NSX. Everything I just talked about right now, these are just interfaces that's going back to NSX saying, do this for me, okay? And you can see it's actually deploying the appliances. Now, sometimes I'll get people here staring at this screen. You know, your best bet right now is to walk away. This takes about 30 to 45 minutes. I'm going to walk away from it. And next time we come back, we'll actually see it's going to be done. So with that said, we'll see you back in a bit, which will be like right now. But hey, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel. We still got the distributed transit gateway to set up, okay? So you want to stick around for that. See you in a bit. Okay, so we're back. It's completed. It took about 40 minutes or so. I'll be honest with you, it's the next day. I didn't bother sitting around for this. I had other things to do. So we see good sign here, success over here, and the 2 nodes are up and running. If there's a problem here, you can click on this and kind of hopefully figure things out. Perhaps I'll do a separate troubleshooting video. But again, you need to know NSX to do the troubleshooting of this stuff. So you see there's 2 edges deployed. You see there are taps over here. So there's 2 taps. One of the things I pointed out during the install, notice these port groups they created, these weird names. And there's a port group for each interface for each edge. So you'll see edge 1, it's first fast path ETH0 interface, and edge 1 fast path ETH1. Then you see edge 2 for both fast paths there. So that's how it's set up to do that. Whether I agree with that or not, whatever. We'll see what the future brings. One of the things I've noticed in the past, you see these port groups, if for whatever reason, if you click on proceed, and if there was a problem, a lot of times it creates these port groups, and then you go, oh, there was a problem, let me fix that. Then you hit proceed, it will create those port groups again. So you may see a whole list of these if you have to retry deploying and you know made a mistake, you typed in something wrong. You may have to go in and delete the port groups manually. You'll see over here there's 2 edge nodes. Where are they? There we go. Edge nodes 1 and 2 are deployed and they're up and running. There's the appropriate addresses. What did it do in NSX, right? When we look inside NSX, if I go to system here, some of the obvious stuff will be under nodes. It made 2 edge nodes. Come on, there we go. And it made an edge cluster for me, that edge cluster. Excellent, okay? It also then created, let's go into here. It created my transit gateway. There's the tier 0 gateway. It created for external connections, the gateway connection here, and it's using this transit gateway here that we created. And then under transit gateway, you'll see there's that one that we just created, okay? There is no tier 1 gateways here. So it really created all this stuff for me. If I look at segments, again, it's got a couple segments it created, again, for this edge transport, for the edge transport nodes. Again, these are basically like uplink segments. I'm not sure, again, why they do individual ones, but again, okay, that's the way it's done. Sure, there's a reason for it. But let's look underneath the covers and see what's going on. I'm going to connect to one of the edges. Now, I've already enabled SSH. Let me go back to system here. Let's go to nodes. It's not enabled by default, but if you select your edge and you go to here, actions, change node settings, and you give it a few seconds. Pretty sure I enabled it on this one. I do this stuff so many times I forget what I do sometimes. But anyways, it's loading up. Come on. Cooperate with us. All right, there we go. Yeah, I did enable it. Allow SSH login. That's disabled by default. I turned it on, and I did that. I just want to show you something here. So let me go into my edge node 1 there. I've enabled SSH. Let's go into that one, and let me log in as admin. And my password. I think I might have messed up that password. No, I didn't. Come on. I'm going to type in get, was it transit gateways? Yeah, look at that. It's a new command. Get TGWS. And it shows me my my transit gateway here. VRF distributed router tier 0. VRF service router tier 0. So it's showing me my transit gateway. If I just run the regular command get logical routers, commands that I've run, if you watch my troubleshooting videos in NSX, you'll see here we actually have, okay, VRF 0 is the tunnel. You'll see we have a DR for the management. DR management tier 0, transit gateway 01, SR for the transit gateway. So there's a DR component, SR. If you don't know what DRs and SRs are, you're going to watch my routing videos. So we see that for the transit gateway. Then you see this DR, VRF transit gateway, and again an SR for the VRF transit gateway. Okay, so we see these underneath the covers here. So if I actually wanted to look at my, let's say, this is, again, notice over here it says it's a tier 0 gateway, and this is the distributed router. Let's look at the routing. Let's go into the SR component of my tier 0, and that's number 2, VRF 2. So I'll type in VRF 2, hit enter, and then I'll just type in get routes. And again, these are my routes that it's learned from my upstream BGP. So everything was configured correctly, right? We don't need to care about all that stuff. If I exit from there, let's get logical routers. If I look, that was the SR component of the tier 0. How about the SR component on that transit gateway? I wonder what that looks like. That's number 5. Let's type that in. VRF 5. And let's look get routes. Oops. Get outs. How about get routes? Did I make another typo? Get route. Guess that's wrong. And you'll see some routes that it has. It looks like the main thing it has is a default route going to, looks like this is going to be going to that tier 0 gateway, which kind of makes sense. And notice it's IVS, and IVS over here, if we look at it, what do we got here on the tables here? IVS, inter VRF static route. Interesting. So I'm kind of looking at this transit gateway. Maybe it's a VRF. I've done videos on VRF. Interesting stuff. So anyways, so we have some stuff there. Anyways, that's pretty much it. Now, that's the centralized transit gateway. What about the distributed transit gateway? Okay. All right, let's close this down. Let's go, okay. Let's close all this down. I've got a different workload domain, which I showed you earlier on. Let's get out of there. Let's go into my other workload domain. So that would be vCenter 1B. And let's log into that. So this is a different vCenter server. And we'll log in as administrator. I knew I made a mistake there. No tactile. Okay, so here's a different vCenter. It's a different workload domain vCenter, so different vCenter server, different NSX. Notice again when I go into select my vCenter server, I can select the networking view. I don't really have to, but you'll see network connectivity. There's nothing configured. If I go into the NSX, that should be site a-nsx manager-01b vclass.edu. Oh, I gotta put in HTTPS. There we go. This is a different NSX manager, and I just did this to show you, again, doing it from vSphere, all right? Now let's set up the distributed transit gateway. This one's actually a whole whack load easier. So let's just first of all look at this one here. I don't like the dark theme, so let's go into the light. That's just me. I'm gonna go to Fabric. You're gonna see there's no edge nodes. Come on. There's no edge nodes. My hosts, this workload domain has 3 hosts, and they've been prepared for NSX. That was all part of my workload domain preparation. I'll do a separate video on that. That'll be coming up soon. If I look into networking here, I go transit tier 0. There's nothing. External connection. There's nothing. Transit gateway. There's a default transit gateway, which is always there, but there's not configured. Tier 1's nothing. Segments, there's nothing. So it's pretty much a plain Jane install, so to speak. All right. Now let me go back to my iPad real quickly. Setting this up is easy, but let me show you one thing you got to be aware of. Let's go back to here. So let's talk about the distributed transit gateway. So again, this is that new edgeless option, and I talked about some of the limitations on that. Again, we looked at that chart that I talked about. So there's certain features you're not able to do. So you got to keep that in the back of your mind. If you don't care about those ones, great. This is very simple. It says it's instantiated on each of the transport nodes, your hosts, your ESX hosts, sorry. All hosts must have their TEP uplinks attached to the VLAN defined for external connections. So that's the little gotcha. So this is basically a direct connection to your physical network, into your physical environment. So here's my transit gateway. There's the DR component. There's no SR because there's no edge, right? This needs a direct connection to your physical environment. So this will be, again, the VLAN that you have to set up. And then over here, this has to be what your TEP, these are whatever network adapters you have in your hosts. I don't care if you got 6, 10 network adapters or 2, whatever. It's whatever adapters you're using, whatever uplinks you're using for your TEPs, those uplinks have to be on this VLAN. That's what this thing needs, okay? And that's what they're kind of saying there. External connection specifies the VLAN and the default gateway. So we need to know the VLAN and the default gateway in this example here, okay? In my lab environment, it's a bit, actually, is it? It doesn't really matter. I'll do it to that one. And that's it, okay? So let's go in. I'll actually do a different IP here, or CIDR here. So let's go back into here. Let's go back into vSphere, and let's click on Configure Network Connectivity. This one's really easy. I can see your vSphere administrators doing this. You just say, I want to do distributed. Great. You go next. It'll come up and say, these are your checkpoints. Dedicated VLANs. Disable ICMP redirect on external gateways. That's like an ICMP proxy. You probably already have it disabled because, from what I understand, it could be a security issue. Resolve external IP blocks for VPC. Okay, so again, I mentioned that in the centralized, you have this reserved external block of IPs. We'll see more of that when I get into VPCs later. Let's click on continue. This is basically it. My VLAN is going to be 10011 or 1011. The gateway in my lab environment, I think it's this one anyway, so I can always fix it. It'll be 192.168. No, that's not what I want. 10.1.1. So let's try this again. 10.2.2.254. Okay, and that's the CIDR, so I have to put in /24. And I made a mistake. The gateway 10.2.2.254. Woo. Okay. Then down here, it's asking you, what is the VPC external block? Okay, so it's going to be basically, this is a routable one. So I'll type in 10.2.0/24. So when I create my networks, public networks, they're going to pull an address from that block. And this is what we call a private transit gateway. And this one here, I'll do 192.168. I think in the other one I did 80 or something like that. No, I did 200. I'll do 180.0/24. Okay, and I'll talk more about those later. That sounds good. I hit deploy, and I'm done. That's how easy it is. Set up a transit gateway, distributed transit gateway. Easy peasy. We can now start creating VPCs, right? But guess what? We're going to do that in another video. But anyways, let's look at NSX and see what it did here. So in NSX, if I go into transit gateways, there's a default transit gateway. There it was created. I have my external connection. It's created it. There's no tier 0 gateway because it's not centralized, and we don't have any tier 0 gateways. That's pretty much about it. Oh, one of the other things I didn't show you in NSX, let's look at networking IP pools, and you'll see IP blocks, external IP address blocks, 10.2.2.0, and then the private, the 192.168. So those are those, it created pools here, or address blocks within NSX, and it did that also on the other one. I didn't show that to you, okay? What else? Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, I forgot. Let's check something else out. Hey, for those of you that quit too early, right? Let's check out something real quick here. What did it do underneath the covers? Let me kill that. Okay. So let's go into my NSX. That's in my workload, my management domain. Actually, I don't have to do that. Sorry. Yeah, actually, I do. Let's go to my NSX in my management domain. Where are you? Right here. So there's the appliance. I'm going to log into the console, and I'm going to log in as admin. Now, I could run the command from here, but the display, actually, it's probably okay. Maybe I'll just run it from here. The display won't look good. Get logical routers. And you see this, again, this will be good enough. It says, oh, warning, this command has been deprecated. Move to the newer one, get gateways. Well, what do you know? Anyway, something new you learn every day. So I can't really highlight this, but you see there's a DRF, sorry, the first line says 0x1 hex 1, right? DR-VRF default gateway, VRF distributed router tier 0, right? There's no SR component because there's no edges. So that's interesting, okay. Great, so it instantiated that. Let's go to one of the hosts in the cluster here. So let's go back to, what do I want to go back to? Here's my workload domain vCenter server. There's one of the hosts. That's here we go again. Let's just confirm, right? Network connectivity. I'm doing distributed connectivity. Let's look at one of my hosts. Okay, let's go into here. Now, let me turn on the SSH service. Start that. Okay, and it's running now. Great. Let's log into that host. 05. Load. Open. And let's make this a little bit more presentable. Change settings. Appearance, we'll go to a 12 font. That's okay. I'll leave the black and white. I'll log into there. I'm going to type in NSX CLI, NSX command line, and then we're going to type in get. Let's try get gateways. How about that? And we see it's showing us really nothing here. Let's type in get transit gateways. And we see TGW router summary. It's not showing us anything, which is interesting. Let's try this other command, get logical routers, which I use a lot. And again, it's really showing us nothing here. So what's going on? And my guess is because it's configured, but this host doesn't have anything to instantiate this distributed router component. In other words, there's no segments or subnet that's using this and no VMs using it. So why instantiate it, right? So we'll have to check this out after we create VPCs and see what happens, okay? But again, we did see it was created in NSX, but it hasn't been pushed down to the hosts, not as of yet. Anyways, little bonus material for you is, again, leave comments, questions down below. We'll talk to you in the next one. Bye for now.